They spent Memorial Day there weekend, last weekend. They said this is the first time they've been there for helping to build. So I think last fall because it's a pump room to my Berkeley. So anyway, we should probably get started.
Let's get started.
I came home on the gateway, they were giving the DNR was
So, I'm just going to give a quick little brief introduction.
Okay.
This is Dorian Grilley with Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota. I think he's been fairly busy with the legislative session, I would imagine. So hopefully he'll talk a little bit about that as well as BikeMN, what's short for Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota. I'll let him do a little bit more of the introduction to the organization. And for those of you online, I think we'll hold questions until the end of the presentation. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
And I'm not going to mute you unless you're being loud and obnoxious. You could also type any questions in the chat for those joining online. Otherwise, all right, take it on.
Sounds good. Well, I've been the executive director of BikeMN since the beginning. I was the co-chair of the steering committee that actually formed the organization. 10 years ago, we celebrated our 10th anniversary last November. And that steering committee put together a mission that basically said looked at what was missing in Minnesota. Nobody was going to the transportation committee and saying biking and walking is transportation too. You know, there's a great organization called the Parks and Trails Council that does a great job of lobbying for recreational stuff, and Minnesota's Trail Network. But nobody was, and the federal government had acknowledged that bicycling and walking was transportation in the early 1990s, thanks to Congressman Oberstar, the late Congressman Oberstar. The other thing that was missing in Minnesota was bike education. In the 1970s, 1980s, Minnesota had a program called the Community Bike Safety Project, and it went away with the recessions and the budget cuts in the early or late 1980s. And that was never really a very aggressive program. They developed a curriculum, sent it out to schools and police departments, and asked them to. So that has all changed, and I will talk a lot more in detail about a lot of that stuff, but you are living in one of the most bicycle-friendly states in the country. I know we have a long ways to go to be really, really bicycle-friendly for those of you who are out there on the roads, but, we've made a lot of progress, thanks in part to Congressman Oberstar and the Nonmotorized pilot project in Minneapolis. But we've worked really hard to make that message statewide, that bicycling and walking is a quality of life indicator. Good bicycling and walking is a quality of life indicator. It makes young people want to live in your community or stay, and it makes businesses want to stay, and we have really, I think, done a great job of convincing people, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail, why on earth Grand Marais or Marshall or Walker are so fired up about this, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about Fergus Falls. We really are not an anti-car organization. We are simply, we want to make it easier and safer to bike and walk more. We elaborate on our vision with 3 program areas of, as I mentioned, advocacy and education. We do both adult and kids education, and we do a lot of community engagement. We work, I spend a lot of time with city councils and planning commissions, and we have chapter organizations, which are really just program committees of our board of directors all over the state of Minnesota. So we're pretty excited about that. We just added Bike Thief River Falls formally as a chapter last night at our board meeting. So, and we also do fun things like the St. Paul Classic and the Mankato River Ramble, I call them, they're not athletic events, I call them community celebrations. They show off what's cool about St. Paul. My standard line about the Classic is, if you don't like Grand Avenue pastries, fair trade coffee, organic fruit, traffic-free streets, and live music that people pay a cover charge every night of the week to see, don't come. So, after doing this for 10 years, these are, I think, some of my favorite reasons why we do this, and some of the best reasons to argue the case that more bicycling and walking is a good thing for Minnesota, a good thing for your community. And the first, as a responsible father, is that the epidemiologists are telling us that 1 in 3 kids are at risk of getting type 2 diabetes at a very young age if we don't change the way we eat and incorporate physical activity into our daily routine. It's just heartbreaking to think of that. So that's the one I always start out with. I think there ought to be billboards on the freeway that say this, that bicycling just 2 miles 3 times a week, you know, it's obviously an indicator of healthy behavior. Reduces your chance of heart disease by almost 50%. That's staggering. And we have some great statistics to show it. That was data collected over the last 35 years by the University of Minnesota and other research institutions all over the country in a study called Cardia. And they have, for the first 5 years, people came in every year and did, you know, stress tests and blood tests and all that kind of stuff. And it's still been every 5 years for the last 35 years. So those diseases related to physical inactivity are costing Minnesota alone $3.7 billion a year. That's according to the healthcare industry, you know, Blue Cross Blue Shield and the Department of Health. Pretty staggering numbers. And my clicker stopped working. Uh-oh. You want to click it forward one?
I gotcha. There you go.
And this has become a pretty universal accepted notion that communities play just a huge role. The land use planning, as you all know, that Minneapolis is working very hard to increase the density along light rail and increase the density of the whole town. And when a community like that is denser, people walk and bike more. So land use makes a big deal. Owen, I'm going to have to tell you to do it each time, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're back in action.
Oh, okay. There we go. Perfect. The good news is that both MnDOT and the Blue Cross Blue Shield Center for Prevention have surveyed people, and people think that bicycling and walking should be part of transportation projects. Obviously, where appropriate, you know, no side paths out in a cornfield, out in the middle of nowhere, but but shoulders. And the wonderful thing about shoulders is that they're the #1 traffic safety prevention. So now here's something that we should be all concerned about here at the Pollution Control Agency and the Department of Natural Resources is, of course, climate change. And depending on who's counting, 1/4 to 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. Because of the hard work of the energy generation, transportation, as you probably all know, has now passed energy production as the #1 emitter of greenhouse gas. And so BikeMN, for a long time, we really focused on public health because that was kind of a universal, kid safety was a very universal thing, and we didn't venture very far into the environment issue. But that all changed on November 8th with a governor who has set climate goals and the change in leadership, at least in the House of Representatives. And they're creating a climate committee. study this stuff. So, and my message is that bicycling and walking are not the solution, obviously, to the 59 billion miles that are driven in Minnesota every year, when right now the current bicycling number, MnDOT's estimate, is 180 million miles. So, 180 million versus 59 billion. But my message is that bicycling and walking is an incredibly cost-effective investment. It does not cost $1 billion to build a bike lane or a bike trail to the southwest suburbs. It does not cost $1 billion to build a bridge across the St. Croix River, that kind of stuff. So, and I've started to just simply tell the story that you all encourage people to turn the lights out when they're not in the room. That is actually making a collective difference. So my message is that bike and walk whenever you have the chance, and it'll make a difference. The other thing is that it's definitely a cultural thing, and we're working on trying to change that and targeting fifth graders, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. But there is one community in the United States that has over 20% mode share for bicycling. That's Davis, California. And they made the decision in the 1970s, with the oil crisis of the 1970s, to do land use and build out the suburbs of Davis, California, with a bicycle beltway instead of a freeway. And they built all the housing developments are cul-de-sacs that back up to the bicycle beltway, and all of a sudden the fastest way to get to the major business in town, the University of California, Davis, and this is a town of 70,000 people, is to bicycle. And it's amazing. It is truly amazing. And as you probably all have heard, places like Copenhagen and Munster, Germany, and it's very nice in Davis, California, but my daughter brought me back a refrigerator magnet that says, bicycling in the wind and weather in Munster, Germany. So they ride in the rain and the snow. So I think it's something that's possible. This is my favorite one as an old white guy. That old white guys that bike a lot have the immune systems of 20-year-olds. And of course, that doesn't apply to just old white people, but I think, the message is that it's very much an indicator of healthy lifestyle. And this isn't bike a lot. It's 50 miles a week, which, if you think about it, isn't that much. That's less than 10 miles a day. So I showed that little map of bicycle-friendly communities at the beginning, and I'll show it again in a little bit. But I wanted to let you know that to be a bicycle-friendly community, you can't just build it and hope that people come. Did I lose my note? You obviously have to engineer great facilities, but as I mentioned, you need to encourage people and educate people on how to use your existing infrastructure safely. I think, and obviously our message has been carried or accepted, that Minnesota small towns where the streets are wide and there's very little traffic are just kind of inherently bike friendly. And people are, thanks a lot to the public health people, are bicycling and walking a lot more. We want to make sure that the rules are enforced for everybody equitably. That's a very important one. And we want to make sure that our investments, whether they are programming like education or events or encouragement, or building facilities, are evaluated and make sure that our investments are done well. And I like to say that we look at all the first 5 E's there with an umbrella or an equity lens to make sure that it's reaching every member of the community. And obviously, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the ranking of bike-friendly communities is done by the League of American Bicyclists, and it's 180 questions, 40 pages. So it's a big commitment for a small community to actually do something like this. But the simple thing is, you can do a lot with paint and sign. Winona, less than $100,000 invested, has one of the most complete on-road bike systems in the state. You know, they have a little trouble getting from one side of US Highway 61 to the other, but otherwise it's a great thing. We have trained a couple hundred people, like this volunteer and this volunteer, to do bike safety education for both adults and kids outside of the schools. So, and I know Veronica has actually taught adult learn to ride classes. So there is a market for this stuff, and I think it's really, really important that we do it. I think it's really cool when the police officers come to a school or or actually produce a bike rodeo on a Saturday morning and teach kids how to ride safely on the road. This is one of my favorites. The Minnesota High School Cycling League has bloomed from nothing 7 or 8 years ago to 75 teams and, I don't know, like 5,000 kids. Some of the schools are actually offering letters. The bike shop owner in Hutchinson, Minnesota, the Tigers, on the right, I think made an incredibly wise investment in his business, and he bought the team 10 bicycles and pays for their uniforms. And all of a sudden there's a bunch of kids that have to ride really, really nice bikes in Hutchinson, and no one is. I'm not going to talk about all the plans, but MnDOT has some great plans. St. Paul, Minneapolis, Rochester all have bike plans. Hennepin County are doing great work, and I lost it again, Owen. And I think one of the most important things is the Department of Health, Statewide Health Improvement Partnership, has funded over 200 Safe Routes to School plans, and MnDOT has done so too with that federal money that I told you about that started being available in the 90s, and they made Safe Routes to School planning eligible in the mid-2000s. So that, I think, is one of the great changes that has happened. One of the things BikeMN does in partnership with the Department of Health and MnDOT is we actually go to a community and do what we call a Bikeable Community Workshop, where we ask the staff, elected officials, and community leaders to actually get on bicycles and sit around and talk about the 6 E's of being a bike-friendly community, and then talk in detail and come up with an action plan. It's a full-day workshop. Let's see, the last 2 that we did were in Cannon Falls and Pipestone. So, and people apply, our communities actually apply to host these and get commitments of who's going to attend. And we have bike fleets that we actually bring bicycles and helmets to the town, so people don't have to bring their own bikes. And some people haven't been on bicycles for a long time, and we've had a few skinned knees, but we still, people get excited about it. Bicycle-friendly businesses has also taken off. The Pollution Control Agency, thanks to Melissa Wenzel, I think is a bicycle-friendly bicycle-friendly business. And they are all over the state, ranging from Target Corporation in downtown Minneapolis. Target headquarters has twice as many, about 400 indoor bike parking spaces, and they only have about 200 indoor car parking spaces.
You could use that.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things we're trying to improve is parking.
Right back here by the dumpster, huh?
Right?
Yeah.
Yep. That's where bike parking has traditionally been for a long, long time.
3-year wait list for the lockers.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm assuming there are some lockers down on the other side that are full.
Quite a long wait list.
Okay.
To that. Maybe we could create more lockers.
Yeah.
Since everything has been discussed.
Yeah.
And nothing.
Every option you could think of.
And 3M has a super competitive spirit. 2 years ago, they actually won the National Bike Challenge. Of course, they all have really nice bikes and they all have phones, so they logged 1.5 million miles in 1 year on their phones. Same sort of thing, bicycle-friendly business. You have to encourage people. You have to have Some facilities, obviously parking, showers get you higher up on the list. And there are some places that really weave it into their culture. And this I wanted to show you because Fergus Falls, not a very big town. I think it's about 12,000, 15,000. Now has more bike-friendly businesses than Minneapolis. Certainly Minneapolis has more employees at those bike-friendly businesses. But as you can see, it ranges from really small, probably a 10-person operation, the pizza place. But the mayor owns the pizza place. And if you're a nerd like me and watch the State of the State, he was one of the people that the governor called out and said, Fergus Falls is an example of why we need aid to local government. He had a whole bunch of examples that he called out. But as you can see, here's the police. They've been trained to do bike safety education in the schools and adults. But this is one of the most amazing places. Quality Bicycle Products in Bloomington has about 600 employees in their three locations, but 450 of them here in Bloomington, and about 20% of them take them up on the offer of $3 a day in incentives to ride to work. And that means about 20% of their employees are riding to work 100 times a year. And Health Partners, they're self-insured, and Health Partners is their preferred provider, did a study of those people and found that the 20% that ride 2 days a week or 100 times a year costs them half to insure or to cover with their health coverage as the other 80%. So, back to that statistic that you saw that I said should have been on a billboard. And Owen, I don't know if you can make this go. If it doesn't, check and see if you go up with your arrow.
I just saw it.
Oh, right there. Yeah. Click that. Now watch. Just a second. Just rode up on his bike. Waved his small magnetic card in front of that. They have those in Munster, Germany, Copenhagen, and that one was outside the train station in Kyoto, Japan. There are none in the United States, but an underground parking garage of 1,000. And I don't know how it works, but the bike comes back in 15 seconds too. I watch people get them back. Pretty amazing.
Like a vending machine.
Yeah. Just went up and waved their wallet. So, anyway, that's a bicycle-friendly business. I'm just going to click through, how we got to where we are with partners all over the state. The Department of Health and MnDOT partnered with us and Blue Cross Blue Shield to create a group that just meets virtually once a month at lunchtime on the third Wednesday called the Leadership Network. It's the educators, it's the advocates all over Minnesota, and they share stories. We feature 2 stories and then have a discussion each month. League cycling instructors, as I was telling you, those are the volunteers that I pointed to that have actually taken about 40 hours of training. They have taken a 9-hour prerequisite class to learn the curriculum, and then a 22-hour seminar to learn how to teach the curriculum. And then they have to team teach that 9-hour class with a league cycling instructor. So we have about 200, about 100 of them are active, and they're doing stuff all over Minnesota. And as I mentioned before, there really is a big market, especially in the agricultural processing centers, the regional centers around southern Minnesota, where there are a lot of new immigrants and a lot of new immigrant women who came from cultures that they didn't even learn to ride a bicycle when they were little. So it's been great. The smiles on their faces, as I'm sure Veronica can testify, it's just amazing. This is a partnership that we did with Blue Cross Blue Shield, funded by MnDOT. 6 years ago, we created an elementary school safety curriculum, looked all over the country at what was going on, and pick the best. It's called Walk, Bike, Fun. And we train teachers 15 to 20 at a time because it, like the other class I was telling you about, it includes on-bike lessons, and we have 160 bicycles that we're delivering to communities all over the state. We leave them with a FIAD teacher for a week where they do the 3 on-bike lessons. There's 7 classroom lessons, I think. And we're now reaching 75,000 kids a year with that. The target age for the bike part is 5th grade, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. The walking part is 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade. And I think my heart tells me that that's going to be our most successful effort. 20 years from now, I think there will be a significant shift. Minneapolis is just totally into it. St. Paul just adopted it 2 or 3 years ago. It's still not in every school, elementary school in St. Paul, but it's our social engineering effort, and I hope that it's successful. So we also, in addition to the teacher trainings, we train community volunteers to go in and help the teacher, because needless to say, a single FIAD teacher can't take 30 kids out on the streets of their community alone. So my staff is in Thief River Falls today doing an ambassador training. This, again, is a map that combines the blue bicycles, as you saw before, the bicycle-friendly communities. It needs to be updated. The dots are where we have trained educators to be part of that Walk, Bike, Fun. And the stars are, those out of order. The stars are the Minnesota Mayoral Active Transportation Caucus. We started that caucus in partnership with the Heart Association and the public health campaign called Minnesotans for Healthy Kids. And their simple message is that biking and walking should be part of transportation funding in Minnesota like it is at the federal level, and that biking and walking is important everywhere in Minnesota, not just the urban core. So to make that happen, the first thing we did was ask the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul not to join. And the co-chairs, the first co-chairs were the former mayor of Rochester, the mayor of Apple Valley, and the mayor of Frazee, Minnesota, probably right here, a town of 1,000 people. And my favorite story about Frazee is that they have twice as many police bikes as they have police cars. 2. So, anyway, the Mayor's Caucus has been wonderful. The new mayors are the mayor of Walker, a real estate agent who truly understands and believes that the bicycle-friendly community ranking that he got a couple weeks ago has added value to every piece of property in town. May only be 0.5%, but if you count every, or 0.25%, that's still a lot of money when you add it all up. The mayor of Rochester, Kim Norton, is a former state representative and the co-chair of the Legislative Childhood Obesity Working Group. She's totally into it. She got a Bush Fellowship to go to Copenhagen and Munster, Germany to study this stuff. So she's into it. And the third is the mayor of Richfield, the new mayor of Richfield, who's a public health professional, Maria Reagan Gonzalez. And needless to say, she was the ship coordinator for Bloomington and Richfield. So she totally gets it too. So I'm backing up to this slide. There's the Minnesotans for Healthy Kids Coalition. So we have young people, old people. AARP has adopted us. They want us to help them shake the idea or the image of just being a bunch of old people that care about Social Security and Medicare. And they have a campaign called Real Possibilities, which really invites people to come out and do fun things. And the most fun thing they pay us to do is be ride leaders and start at a brewery go for a ride, come back, and then they buy everybody a beer. They don't buy everybody a beer before we go for a ride, and they only buy you one. But anyway, it's been really fun to work with them and help them shake that image. Mayor's Caucus. I just put this up here again, so it's a little bigger. I just think it's so interesting that there's only 7 in the metro area of the 29 in Minnesota, and that Walker, I didn't mention Walker, but maybe you saw it on the bike-friendly business slide. Walker has the most bike-friendly businesses per capita in the country. It's only 8, but there's only 900 people in Walker, Minnesota. Unfortunately, the brew pub burned down over the winter, but they immediately did a tip district, and they're rebuilding it as we speak. So, I could talk forever about each one of those communities, but I don't have time today. So, as I promised, Owen, I'm going to skim through our legislative agenda and talk to you about what we care about at the Capitol. We do employ a lobbying firm, and I am also a registered lobbyist, as is our communications director, because technically if you show up there and say anything, you have to be a registered lobbyist. So, needless to say, this did not happen. But we have documented in partnership with Move Minnesota, formerly Transit for Livable Communities, that we could easily spend $30 million more a year. We're spending $30 million between the metro area and greater Minnesota a year on biking and walking right now, mostly infrastructure, a little bit of programming. MnDOT actually does have some state money as their base funding of just $500,000 a year to do program work for Safe Routes to School, and that's part of what pays. We don't obviously get $500,000 a year, but we get a portion of that to do our elementary school Walk Bike Fun education programming. And as I said, we entered the climate scene and testified at the Transportation Committee that, as I said before, we know biking and walking is not the solution, but it's a very cost-effective investment in being a bigger part of the solution. And this is just truly maddening. 2 years ago, there was a policy, or 2 sessions ago, there was a policy bill, and I have a group that I call the Lovable Policy Nerds, who read the state statutes and say, oh my gosh, the only vehicle on the road that can legally have a bell is a fire truck. and we got an exception to the stud ban for bicycles only. Goofy things like that. But also some, I think, really, really important things like right now it's illegal for you to be on a busy county road on the shoulder and ride through a right turn lane without turning right. Nobody's getting arrested for that. Nobody's getting ticketed for that. But if you got hit by somebody turning left in front of you, it'd be your fault. So we're working on changing that. The other rule that we've been working on is as far to the right as practicable, which is interpreted by most police departments as far to the right as you can possibly ride. And instead, we want it to say as far to the right as safe as determined by the bicyclist. So that's at least 4 feet out from the car doors, at least 4 feet out from the edge of the road, so you have some maneuvering room. So hopefully that will, and we did a survey, like a biking and walking survey. Maybe some of you actually filled it out. We had 3,000 responses to 75 questions. And people said, bicyclists said they were most afraid of drivers, and the number one thing, what they were most afraid of when they were riding was obviously motor vehicles, and the number one thing was people on their phones. Walkers were most concerned that they were going to get run over by somebody turning right on red without looking, which is more of an education problem. But the hands-free cell phone bill, as you probably all know, passed with great fanfare on April 12th.
Well, now it's statewide ban on.
It goes into effect August 1st, and it's a hands-free, so you can have it mounted to your phone or your dashboard and push the button and say, hey Siri, call Owen. That's okay. But holding it up to your ear, obviously texting is illegal right now. They had a crackdown the week that passed, and the morning edition people on NPR News were reporting the State Patrol was tweeting live what was happening, and they just picked up somebody in Brooklyn Park who was watching Parks and Rec on their phone while they were driving to work. So some other policy things that we were working on. MnDOT's advisory committee expired last year and was not reauthorized for the first time in 35 years. There's a bicycle route that goes from here to Canada, and it's called the North Star route, and we'd like it to be renamed after Congressman Oberstar, the late Congressman Oberstar. Lower urban speed limits. You get hit at 30 miles an hour, your chances of dying are probably around 80%. You get hit at 20 miles an hour, your chances of dying are more around 20%. So speed does make a huge difference. And I noticed that in Fargo, Minnesota, or Fargo, North Dakota. One Saturday morning, I was riding from a hotel to a presentation at a school on the outer edge of town. And I was like, why are all the cars going so slow? As if they weren't just zoom, zoom, going by me. The speed limit's 25, and people actually were driving 25 miles an hour, and I was going 20. And, it was really a strange, but it was really noticeable. We support the Parks and Trails Council's bonding requests, and then the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership is a teeny portion of that provider tax that you probably heard that they were fighting over till the last minute. But it did get included. The governor wasn't going to budge on that one, and it just makes me crazy that they would consider discontinuing the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership, because Minnesota is one of the only states in the country that has flattened the obesity curve. Everybody is still getting heavier and heavier. The percentage of the population that is considered obese is getting bigger and bigger. And Minnesota has actually flattened it in the last 10 years. And I think a lot of it has to do with the education and programming of the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership. So what actually happened? MnDOT still has their $500,000 a year to do Safe Routes to School programming. MnDOT was ordered to spend more federal money. They spend about $30 million right now in biking and walking. They were ordered to spend $5 million more, which will make a difference. Obviously, hands-free cell phone. And the Bicycle Alliance purposely did not engage in the speed limit thing because, we were a little twitchy about, if we push that button, it might come back and bite. So Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, and Rochester started the momentum. And then the libertarians in the Senate said, well, we can't just have Minneapolis, Rochester. It's every city should have the right to lower the speed limit. And the League of Cities had always said, we don't want every city to have to make this decision. We want the legislature to make that decision. But they backed off and said, sure, we'll take this step. So communities are now able to lower the bicycling speed, or the urban speed limit to 25 miles an hour. And you probably all heard they had agreed to do a $500 million bonding bill, but then they couldn't agree on the details and adjourned without doing it. So very frustrating, because Safe Routes to School infrastructure would have been a big part of the bonding bill, as would our metropolitan, greater Minnesota regional trails and state trail system would have been a big part of that bonding bill. So, and I participate every year since they've invented since a guy in Minneapolis created 30 days of biking, which is ride every day in April. This year, it wasn't as challenging as it was last year when it snowed. Snowed for 24 hours straight, and a friend invited me to go skiing. I couldn't get out of our alley, but I could lift my bicycle over the snowdrift that was at the end of my driveway and bicycle through the streets that had been plowed. So let's leave it there, and how about questions?
Well, as you're thinking about questions, I have a few online, so
Okay.
I'll start with a few of those, and then we'll have some live ones. The first one is a question about the investment in Winona's
Infrastructure, yeah.
How did that? Do you have any statistics on how that changed the?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. But the bicycle mode share in Winona was probably around 1%. So I'm not sure that it made a huge difference. But Minneapolis, I do have a mode share example though. When Minneapolis got to $25 million in 2007, I think, to do the there were 4 communities that got $25 million to do a non-motorized pilot project. And they were able to push in 5 years the mode share from about 2% to about 5%. So it does actually make a difference if there's a comprehensive effort going on.
That's a substantial improvement.
Yeah, that was from about 750,000 trips a day in Minneapolis to 2.5 million, or something like that. A big jump.
Certainly. Another question about the QBP. Their incentives for biking and the study that was done.
Yeah.
Was that, I don't know if you know the details about about the statistics on that. If that, was it 20%?
20% ride 100 times a year, 2 days a week.
And they were cheaper to insure.
Right.
Was
Cost
that,
about $100 a month versus $200 a month.
did that take into age, younger people?
No, I think it was the whole spectrum of employees there.
And then the follow-up question is, was Health Partners giving them a discount for them implementing
That I don't know.
that program?
That I don't know. And the $3 a day is actually really just for bike nerds because it means you can buy stuff. You get a credit at wholesale price. They're a wholesale distributor of bicycle parts and bicycles. So it's not cash, actually.
No, but
Yeah.
it goes towards your new biking gear.
Right. So I do believe they have additional Health Partners. Yes, because Health Partners, well, they're self-insured, so they're just paying Health Partners for each time somebody goes to the doctor.
Right. Okay.
So it was saving. And here's the statistic. They invest about $45,000 a year in incentives, and they estimated it was saving them $175,000 directly in healthcare costs. And then they measured absenteeism and productivity, and they found those 20% were there more often and more productive. So the $45,000 investment was saving them $175,000 a year. So not very often you can do something like that. Other questions?
Did anybody have any? I can keep.
I was wondering if you have any education ideas for some of the increased polarizing of the share of the road. Obviously, social media, you see the extremes, but I mean, we had the recent bicyclist hitting the bus blocking the bike lane. That was advertised 3 times. He did it, and then there's just tons of
the vigilante, the bike vigilante in Minneapolis.
But then there's especially when whether it's paint or if it's a divided, there's lots of backlash on giving up parts of the road. It just seems like it's getting a little worse on the extreme ends. And we're actually partially responsible for the school bus thing, or we are responsible for the school bus thing, because my lovable policy nerd said school buses are stopping in the driving lane, and bicyclists are going by on the right without stopping when they're loading and unloading kits. Ooh.
So we asked the legislature, we try to appear to be reasonable when we're asking for as many policy things as we do. And we said we should offer an exception for school buses because they're stopping mid-block and they should be able to block the bike lane. So those school buses were legally blocking the bike lane but I think the whole conversation just, again, my hope, starting with 5th graders, there's no hope for people my age to change their ways. And we also have a curriculum, which I should have included in here, that we're just now starting to launch called People-Friendly Drivers. And we're working with Public Safety and the Minnesota Safety Council to try and ensure that it's not only part of driver ed for young people, but driver ed for the elderly discount program, driver ed for businesses. A lot of people make I used to work for the state. They made you take a safe driving class right before you drive motor pool cars. That people-friendly drivers curriculum, I hope will, and I know AAA has run a few public service announcements with a bicyclist, showing a bicyclist, riding on the road and then going home and being a dad to a family of little kids, and trying to humanize that person that drivers are demonizing.
Because of the colorful spandex.
Yeah, we're trying.
So, any prospect of a what is it called? They have it in some states, sort of a yield at stop sign.
Idaho stop.
Yeah. Idaho stop. Yeah.
Idaho stop.
Yep.
Yes.
Stop as yield. We have always said, yes, we'll think about that when bicyclists are thought of as law-abiding citizens. Right now, I go to half the people in the legislature and they think I'm just a lawless renegade, and or that most bicyclists are lawless renegades. We're trying to make the case that
we have unreasonable laws that no reasonable person will follow.
Right. I agree, and the percentage of people that speed when they're driving, and the percentage of people that run stop signs when they're driving is equal to or greater than the number of bicyclists, the percentage of bicyclists, and that's St. Paul has actually done a study and has that documented. So yes. It's always there in the back of our mind, and when the stars align, we'll make it happen.
A related question that is kind of a tactic on how to approach those sensitive issues. Is it, I guess, better to bring it up, knowing that it's not going to pass? But to get the conversation started, or what's the best approach?
Some of our lobbyist has been hanging around the Capitol for 45 years, and he suggests that we
we bring up, I mean, changing as far to the right as practicable to as far to the right as safe is controversial to some people. So the stop as yield or the Idaho stop rule, I think would just put some people in orbit. We push, and we get pushed back. And that is our indicator of how hard we can push. And we consider the Idaho stop something that's, we're not capable of pushing yet.
So as far as the right is practical, is that the law in every jurisdiction around Minnesota, or is there some ordinances that
No,
say
it's a state law.
if safe, not as safe? It's nationwide. There's a lot of if safe, and then otherwise there's the take the lane,
Right.
where it's supposedly safer than if you can't be passed safely and you're
Right.
going to be brushed by the truck.
Yeah.
You make people angry. Are you better off taking the lane than being brushed off the road?
Right. Yeah, it varies, and the League of American Bicyclists and the National Council of State Legislatures actually keeps a tally. And there are 15 states that have changed as practicable to as safe as determined by the bicyclist. So there are a few out there that are doing those kind of things. And I might add, we also changed the law that makes it legal for a driver to pass a bicycle by crossing the double yellow line when safe to do so. Because you find a lot of urban streets where the speed limit's 30 miles an hour, hopefully someday it'll be 25, that has a double yellow line on it. It's perfectly straight, it's perfectly flat, and it's 12 feet wide, which means if you're riding 3 or 4 feet out from the curb, an 8-foot or 7-foot car can't pass you without crossing the center line. So that's, as I said, we try and do reasonable things to a school bus and that rule.
Dorian, not so much a question, but just a comment based out of frustration. My commute from home into work is roughly 12 miles when I do it. And maybe a third of that is on bicycle-friendly either trails or lanes. The rest is on streets that it's just the last several years, just the upkeep of streets, the amount of cracks and potholes that you have to dodge is just.
And the closer you get to here,
Right.
it's
The concrete street right in front of here is awesome.
Aside from spending tons of money on either having wheel sets that are immune to rim bending and whatnot, or spending money on spoke trimming, rim trimming, I don't know what to do, but.
Yeah. No, well, part of it is our transportation funding and infrastructure is so focused on building new stuff, building a 4-lane US Highway 14 all the way across southern Minnesota, making it into a freeway. And aid to local government has been cut, and that's what, helps pay for a lot of the stuff around here. So I have, we have some very conservative people among our lovable policy nerds, and one of them is off the end of the libertarian meter, and he says, the infrastructure that bicyclists use the most, it should be and the excuse that we don't pay for the roads. Well, the infrastructure that bicyclists use the most is 80 to 90% paid for with local taxes, which everybody pays. So his message is, we all pay for the roads we use the most. We should all be able to use them safely. So I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
We gotta get the local governments to fix Lafayette Road in front of the PCA building.
All right, thanks.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll have lunch sometime.
I'm not drunk on avoiding potholes.
Yeah, I've given up riding a skinny-tired bike in town. I ride, the one I rode here is 700 by 35, so they're at least